Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're unpacking the foundational philosophies of a true financial classic, Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. We're going to look at the stark contrast between two very different father figures and, how their opposing mindsets actually shaped a brilliant blueprint for financial independence.
So here's a question for you. What do the rich teach their kids about money that the poor and middle class do not? It's a pretty provocative thought, right? This question really hooks us right away and sets the frame for this entire explainer, because it tells us that wealth, well, it's not just about how much money you happen to bring in. It's really about the underlying education and the mindset that gets passed down from generation to generation.
All right, to really get this, we're starting with Section 1, A Tale of Two Dads.
So, the author grew up watching two massive, highly influential figures. First, his biological father, who was highly educated but really struggled financially, and then his friend's father, an 8th grade dropout who literally built a financial empire. And the sheer contrast in their core beliefs, staggering. On one hand, you had the poor dad who firmly believed the love of money is the root of all evil, but on the other hand, the rich dad argued that the lack of money is the root of all evil. It's a brilliant visual dichotomy that perfectly captures their opposing worldviews. And honestly, having these two strong, completely opposite voices forced a young Robert to critically compare their advice instead of just blindly accepting what adults told him.
Now, the crucial point here is how they handled everyday challenges. Let's say there was something they wanted to buy. The poor dad would just state, "I can't afford it." Simple as that. But the rich dad, he absolutely forbade those words from being spoken in his house. Instead, he insisted on asking, "How can I afford it?" Notice the difference? One is a statement that just lets you off the hook. It's basically a sign of mental laziness that puts your brain right to sleep. The other? It's a question. It forces your brain to wake up, get some exercise, and creatively solve a problem.
Which leads us directly into Section 2, Trapped in the Rat Race. So as we step into the adult workforce, a lot of us fall into this deep psychological trap. Think about it. Why do we actually work? Logically, most people would just say, well, to pay the bills or to survive. But the truth goes way deeper. For the vast majority of people out there, the answer isn't logic at all. Actually, it's driven purely by immediate emotional reactions. The fear of not having enough money and the greed or, the desire for what a paycheck can buy.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how these steps perfectly illustrate the rat race. You get up, you go to work, you pay your bills, and then you just repeat. It's a relentless, lifelong cycle. And it's fueled by that fear of being broke, which pushes you out the door to your job every morning, and the greed for what a paycheck can buy, which keeps you spending whatever you earn. And here's the kicker. If you offer someone trapped in this cycle more money, they don't break free. No, they just increase their spending. The trap totally remains.
To drive this lesson home, the rich dad had the young boys work in his dusty convenience store for just 10 cents an hour. Obviously, this naturally caused anger, resentment, and this intense feeling of being exploited by a boss. But then he did something radical. He made them work for zero pay. Exactly, nothing. Taking away the paycheck entirely forced their minds to stop relying on an employer to solve their money problems. It literally forced them to look around and spot new opportunities. And guess what? Working for free led them to invent a comic book library out of discarded comic covers, and they started charging neighborhood kids admission. They successfully escaped that employee mindset and built a system that paid them even when they weren't physically working. A total game changer.
And that brings us to the core mechanism of doing exactly that in Section 3, Assets versus Liabilities.
Listen, if you take only one single thing away from this explainer today, please let it be this fundamental rule. The rich dad operated on the KISS principle. Keep it super simple. If you strip away all the complex accounting jargon, the confusing spreadsheets, the high-level financial terminology, you're left with this beautifully clear definition. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket. Period. That's it. It is absolutely, emphatically, the single most important rule to getting rich.
By direct contrast, a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. The core reason for lifelong financial struggle is really that the middle class continually acquires liabilities. Brand new cars, expensive gadgets, high-interest debt, but they falsely believe those things are assets.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact divide. The middle class earns an income, they use it to buy those liabilities they think are assets, and as a result, their daily expenses simply go up. They are basically stuck running on a treadmill. But the rich, they take their income and buy actual assets. Those assets then generate more passive income, which in turn buys even more assets. This cycle is exactly why the rich get richer while the middle class drowns in debt. Now this brings us to a highly controversial perspective from the source material. Treating your primary residence as your biggest asset is often an illusion. The book argues that a house can actually act as a massive liability. Think about it. Over a 30-year mortgage, a large house drains cash out of your pocket through property taxes, insurance, and those surprisingly high maintenance expenses. But more importantly, tying up all your capital causes a huge loss of time. It leads to missed opportunities where you could have been gaining valuable investment experience by acquiring true income-generating assets.
All right, moving right along to Section 4, mind your own business.
To truly escape the rat race, you have to fiercely focus on your own asset column. There's this fantastic anecdote in the book about Ray Kroc, the legendary founder of McDonald's, speaking to an MBA class. He asked the students what business they thought he was in. They all laughed, thinking it was a joke, and said, "The hamburger business, obviously." But Kroc replied, "I'm not in the hamburger business. My business is real estate." He fully understood that McDonald's true wealth vehicle wasn't selling food at all. It was owning the incredibly valuable intersections and real estate underneath those franchise locations all over the world.
This really highlights a super common confusion. There is a massive, massive difference between your profession and your business. Your profession, whether you're an engineer, a doctor, a mechanic, that's what you study so you can work for others. It pays your daily bills. But your business, that's your asset column. That is what actually builds your personal wealth over a lifetime.
So, what exactly should your business consist of? Well, the text specifically lists these real assets to acquire. This includes businesses that do not require your physical presence, because remember, if you have to be there, well, it's a job, not an asset. It also includes stocks and bonds, income-generating real estate, notes or IOUs, and royalties from intellectual property, like music or patents. The advice here is super practical. Absolutely keep your day job, be a great employee, but diligently build this column on the side. Every single dollar you put in here becomes a tiny employee working for you around the clock. Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 5, making money work. This is all about how the rich protect and measure those growing assets. Once you start acquiring assets, you really need to actively protect them. And a major part of this involves understanding taxes. Historically, income tax was initially sold to the public as a way to penalize only the very wealthy. But the Robin Hood ideal of taking from the rich to give to the poor ultimately backfired. As government appetites grew over time, the tax burden shifted heavily onto the educated middle class. Meanwhile, the rich learned to protect their wealth by utilizing corporations. See, corporations are structured to earn money, spend everything they legally can as expenses, and then only get taxed on whatever is left over.
And this financial intelligence directly affects how different classes spend their money. The middle class tends to buy luxuries first. We're talking big houses, fancy cars, designer clothes, using credit and their own sweat. But this just traps them deeper in the rat race. The rich, however, buy luxuries last. A true luxury should be a reward for diligently building an asset column. The wealthy wait until the passive cash flow generated by their assets can easily pay for the luxury without ever touching their primary capital.
Which brings us to how we actually measure success. The author borrows a really unique definition of wealth from the inventor Buckminster Fuller, who said, "Wealth is a person's ability to survive so many number of days forward." It's not about your net worth, which, let's be honest, is often inflated by personal possessions that don't produce a dime of cash. True financial independence is achieved when the cash flow from your assets completely covers your monthly living expenses. At that point, your money is fully working for you instead of you working for it.
So we're going to end this explainer with a powerful, provocative thought for you to take away. If you stopped working today, how long could you survive? It's a question that forces you to look objectively at your own cash flow, your own asset column, and ultimately your own financial education. Thank you so much for joining me to break down this fascinating material. Keep building those assets and definitely keep exercising that amazing mind of yours.